The black Mercedes glided through the iron gates like it owned the world. And in a way it did. At least that's what James thought as he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. 45 years old, silver streaks just starting to show at his temples, and a bank account that could probably buy this entire neighborhood twice over. He pulled up to the massive house, all glass and steel and carefully planned perfection. Inside, his wife was probably arranging flowers or planning the next charity gala. That's what their lives had become. One beautiful, carefully orchestrated event after another. James stepped out of the car and loosened his tie. Another board meeting done, another million earned, another day of being the man everyone looked up to. The tech genius who'd built an empire from nothing. The philanthropist, the family man. But sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, James wondered if anyone really knew him at all. Daddy. The front door burst open and his daughter came running out, her ponytail bouncing behind her. 8 years old and already the center of his universe, she crashed into his legs with the full force of childhood enthusiasm. Hey, princess. He scooped her up, and for a moment, everything felt real again. Not the mansion, not the money, not the reputation. Just him and his little girl. Mom says we're going to that school thing today. Can I get a snow cone? Please, please, please. James laughed. We'll see. Go get your shoes on. Inside the house, his wife appeared from the kitchen looking elegant as always. Everything about their life looked perfect from the outside. And most days, James almost believed it himself. Almost. But there was something he'd never told her. Never told anyone. A secret that lived in the back of his mind like a locked room he refused to open. 20 years ago, before the money, before the success, before he became the man everyone admired, he'd been someone else entirely. He'd been young and stupid and scared. He'd been a college dropout with big dreams and empty pockets. And he'd been in a relationship with a woman who'd needed him. Really needed him, and he'd run away. She'd been pregnant even now. All these years later, James could feel his stomach tighten when he let himself think about it. But he didn't think about it. That was the trick. You just pushed it down, buried it under layers of success and new memories and the life you built to replace the one you abandoned. He told himself she was fine. She had to be fine. People moved on, didn't they? And the baby. Well, the baby was probably better off without a father who'd been too terrified to face responsibility. That's what he told himself on those sleepless nights. Better off. James, are you ready? His wife's voice pulled him back to the present. Yeah, let's go. The school fare was exactly what he expected. Expensive private school parents. All of them networking and competing and pretending it was about the children. Long tables covered in fancy decorations. Booths showing off programs in music and art and robotics. The kind of place where childhood cost 6 figures a year. His daughter grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a face-painting station. She was chattering about something, probably asking for a butterfly or a rainbow on her cheek. James smiled and nodded, only half listening, his mind still stuck. Somewhere between the board meeting and the locked room in his head he tried never to open. That's when everything changed. They were walking past a booth about the school's volunteer program. Teenagers in matching t-shirts were handing out flyers and talking to parents. James barely glanced at them, but his daughter stopped suddenly, her hand slipping from his. Daddy. Something in her voice made him turn. She wasn't moving. She was staring at one of the teenage boys at the booth. A kid about 16, tall and lanky with messy dark hair and a polite smile as he handed a flyer to an interested parent. Sweetheart, come on. The face painting line is getting long, but she didn't move. She was still staring, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with that strange intensity children get when they notice something adults miss. Daddy, she said again, louder this time. Look at him, James looked. Just a teenage boy, nothing special. He wore a name tag, probably a student volunteer. James started to turn away, already thinking about getting through this event and back home to the quiet of his study. Daddy, that's my brother. The words hit him like a physical force. Time seemed to slow down. His daughter was already moving, pulling away from him, running toward the booth. Toward the boy. Wait, honey, no. James reached for her, but she was too quick, too excited by whatever wild idea had grabbed hold of her imagination. She reached the boy and tugged on his sleeve. The teenager looked down, confused but friendly.
Hi there. You look just like my daddy.
His daughter was practically bouncing with excitement. She pointed back at James, who stood frozen several feet away. See, you have the same eyes. And the same chin. You're my brother, aren't you? The boy laughed awkwardly. I don't think so, kid. I'm an only child. But he looked up at James, and James felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The boy's eyes were green, not just green, that specific shade of green that James saw every time he looked in a mirror, the same green his own father had, a rare color, almost emerald that people always commented on. And the chin, the slight dimple in the center. The way his mouth curved when he was confused, James couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. Not after 20 years of successfully forgetting, of building a new life, of convincing himself that the past was dead and buried. The boy was looking at him strangely now. So were several other parents nearby. His daughter was still talking, still pointing out the similarities with the innocent honesty that only children possess. I'm sorry, James finally managed to say, his voice sounding strange and distant. She has quite an imagination. Come on, sweetie. He reached for his daughter's hand, but she pulled away, stubborn. But Daddy, look at him. He looks exactly like you. Don't you see it? That's enough. His voice came out sharper than he intended. The boy took a small step back, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. James grabbed his daughter's hand more firmly. I'm sorry, he said again to the boy. Really sorry. He started to pull his daughter away, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind racing with impossible possibilities and terrible coincidences, and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. That's when he heard the voice. Daniel, honey, are you okay? A woman was walking toward the booth. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing a volunteer coordinator badge. She looked to be in her early 40s with tired eyes and smile lines around her mouth. She was dressed simply, professionally, like someone who worked hard for everything she had. James turned to look at her, and the world stopped. It was her, 20 years older, her face showing the wear of life and struggle, but it was definitely her. The woman he'd left behind. The woman whose pregnancy had sent him running into the night and out of her life forever. Their eyes met. And in that instant, 20 years of distance collapsed. He saw recognition flash across her face, followed by shock, followed by something harder to name. Pain, anger, fear. She stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the clipboard. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The teenage boy, Daniel, looked between them with growing confusion. Mom, do you know this guy? The word mom confirmed everything James had been too terrified to admit. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't his imagination. This was his son. His 16-year-old son standing right in front of him, alive and real and completely unaware that his biological father was having a complete mental breakdown just feet away. James felt dizzy. The noise of the fair seemed to fade into a distant buzz. His daughter was still talking, still insisting that the boy looked like family, her child's intuition somehow piercing through 20 years of secrets in a single moment of clarity. And the woman, the mother of his child, the person he'd abandoned in the cruelest possible way, was walking toward him now with an expression that promised this conversation, whenever and wherever it happened, was going to destroy everything he'd built. His perfect life was over. He knew it with absolute certainty. Everything was about to change, and he had no one to blame but himself. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. James stood there, his daughter's hand in his, watching the woman he'd abandoned 2 decades ago struggle to compose herself. Her face had gone pale, and she gripped that clipboard like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Around them, the school fair continued. Parents laughed and chatted. Children ran between booths. Life went on, completely unaware that 3 people's worlds had just collided in the most devastating way possible. Mom, the teenage boy, Daniel, looked concerned now. Are you okay? You look weird. She blinked, seeming to remember where she was. Her volunteer coordinator smile slipped back into place, but it was shaky at the edges. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just, I thought I recognized someone. Must be mistaken. But her eyes never left James's face, and the message in those eyes was crystal clear. We need to talk. Now. James felt his wife's hand on his shoulder. He'd almost forgotten she was there. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice carrying that concerned but polite tone she used at social gatherings. She had no idea. No idea at all. Yeah, everything's fine. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth. Just a little mix-up. Our daughter thought she recognized someone. His little girl was still staring at the teenage boy with fascination. But Daddy, not now, Princess. He squeezed her hand gently but firmly. Let's go find that face painting, okay? The woman, he couldn't even think her name without feeling like he might throw up, cleared her throat. Actually, could I speak with you for a moment? About the volunteer program? She gestured vaguely at her clipboard. You seem interested and we're always looking for parent involvement. It was a flimsy excuse and they both knew it. But James's wife just smiled. Oh, how wonderful. James would love to hear about it, wouldn't you, honey? I'll take our daughter to get her face painted. Come find us when you're done. And just like that, she walked away with their daughter, leaving James alone with his past. Well, not alone. The boy was still there, watching them both with confusion written all over his young face. Daniel, the woman said, her voice tight but controlled. Why don't you take your break? Get yourself something to drink. But Mom, my shift isn't. Now please. Something in her tone made the teenager pause. He looked between them again, clearly sensing that something weird was happening but not understanding what. Finally, he shrugged. Okay, fine. I'll be at the food court. He walked away, glancing back once before disappearing into the crowd. James watched him go, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't even name. That was his son, walking away without knowing that his father was standing right there. As soon as the boy was out of earshot, the woman turned to face James fully. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the exhaustion that seemed built into her bones. She'd aged. They both had. But she'd aged in a way that spoke of struggle, of nights spent worrying about bills and futures and raising a child alone. We can't do this here, she said quietly. Her voice was shaking, but there was steel underneath it. There's an empty classroom. Building C, room 215, 5 minutes. She didn't wait for him to respond. She just turned and walked away, her shoulders rigid with tension. James stood there for a moment, his legs feeling like they might give out. He could leave. He could just walk away, find his wife and daughter, go home, pretend this never happened, but he didn't. He couldn't. After 20 years of running, his legs finally started moving in the right direction. Building C was quieter, away from the main fair activities. James's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Room 215 had its door slightly open. He pushed it wider and stepped inside. The woman was standing by the windows, her back to him, still gripping that clipboard. The teenage boy Daniel was there too, sitting in one of the student desks with his arms crossed. So much for getting something to drink. Mom, what's going on? The boy demanded. Why are we hiding in a classroom with some random guy? She turned around slowly. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying or fighting not to cry. Daniel, this is... She stopped, took a breath, tried again. This man isn't random. James felt his heart stop. She wasn't going to do this, was she? Not right now. Not like this, not with the boy sitting right there, okay? Daniel looked even more confused. So who is he? The silence that followed was suffocating. James wanted to speak, wanted to say something, anything, but his voice had completely abandoned him. The woman looked at him, and he saw a decision forming behind her eyes. A decision about whether to protect him or to finally, after 20 years, tell the truth. My name is James, he managed to croak out. And I knew your mother a long time ago. Knew? The woman's voice was sharp. Is that what we're calling it? Daniel looked between them, his teenage brain starting to piece things together. James could see the moment it clicked. The boy's eyes went wide. Wait, are you my... Yes. The woman cut him off, her voice cracking. Daniel, this is your biological father. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Daniel stared at James with his mouth open. Those green eyes, so much like James's own, were filling with a mixture of shock and disbelief and something that might have been hope. James felt like he was falling. His legs actually buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of a desk to steady himself. I didn't know, he started to say. I didn't know he'd be here, I swear I didn't. You didn't know? The woman's voice rose, years of buried anger finally breaking through. You didn't know because you never bothered to check. You disappeared, James. You vanished like I meant nothing, like we meant nothing. Mom, calm down. Daniel started to stand, his protective instincts kicking in. No. She held up a hand. No, Daniel, you need to hear this. You need to know the truth. She turned back to James, tears streaming down her face now. Do you have any idea what it was like? I was 23 years old, pregnant, terrified, and the man I loved just vanished. No phone call, no note, nothing. You just disappeared. James felt his own eyes burning. I was scared. I was so scared. I had nothing. I was failing out of school. I couldn't even take care of myself, and I thought, you thought what? That running away was better than trying? That abandoning us was the noble choice? Her voice broke. I had to drop out of college. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant. I lived in a tiny apartment with no heat in the winter because it was all I could afford. And you were what? Building your empire? I didn't know. James's voice rose too, defensive and desperate. I didn't know you kept the baby. I didn't know you needed help. I was trying to. You didn't know because you never asked, she screamed. You never once tried to find out. You just assumed everything would be fine, that we'd just disappear from your life like we never existed. Daniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Stop, just stop. His voice cracked with emotion. Both adults turned to look at him. Tears were running down the boy's face and his hands were shaking. Is this real? Daniel looked at James with devastated eyes. Are you really my father? James nodded, unable to speak. The weight of 20 years was crushing him. And you just what, you didn't want me? The boy's voice was small now, childlike. You knew Mom was pregnant and you left anyway? No, yes, it wasn't like that. James was stammering, trying to explain the inexplicable. I was young and stupid and terrified, and I made the worst decision of my life. I thought about you, about both of you. I thought about you all the time, but I convinced myself you were better off without me. Better off? Daniel laughed, but it was bitter and hurt. I grew up without a father. Do you know what that's like? Watching all my friends with their dads at baseball games and school events? Mom working herself to death to give me a good life? And you were just, what, getting rich and pretending we didn't exist? The accusation was like a knife, because it was true. All of it was true, I'm sorry. The words felt pathetically inadequate. I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I've been a coward for 20 years. Sorry? Daniel's voice rose again. You're sorry? That's it? That's all you have to say after abandoning us? What do you want me to say? James felt his own anger rising now, defensive and ashamed. I can't change the past. I can't go back and be there for you. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I've known it every single day for 20 years. Then why didn't you come back? The boy's voice cracked completely. If you knew you were wrong, why didn't you ever try to find us? James had no answer. Because the truth was worse than abandonment. The truth was that he'd been too comfortable in his new life. Too afraid of disrupting the perfect image he'd built. Too selfish to face the consequences of his actions. The woman wiped her eyes roughly. He didn't come back because he moved on, Daniel. He got married, had another child, built a successful life. We were just a mistake he wanted to forget. That's not true, James protested weakly. But wasn't it? Hadn't he done exactly that? Daniel looked at his mother, then at James. The boy seemed to age years in those few seconds. His childhood innocence was cracking, reality pouring in through the breaks. I used to imagine you, Daniel said quietly. When I was little and kids at school would ask about my dad, I'd make up stories. I said you were a soldier overseas or a scientist in Antarctica or an astronaut. Mom never told me the truth. She just said you had to go your own way. He looked at his mother with new understanding. You were protecting me, weren't you? Protecting me from knowing that my father just didn't want me. Sweetheart, no. She reached for him, but he stepped back. I need to get out of here. Daniel's voice was hollow now. I just can't. He pushed past James and out the door. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, running now. The woman started to follow him, then stopped. She turned back to James, and the look on her face was devastating. You need to leave. Stay away from us. You made your choice 20 years ago. Don't you dare show up now and destroy the life we built without you. Please, James begged. Please, just let me explain. Let me try to make this right. Make it right? She laughed bitterly. There is no making this right. You can't fix 20 years of abandonment with an apology. You can't buy your way into his life with your money. Just go back to your perfect family and leave us alone. She left then, hurrying after her son, leaving James alone in the empty classroom. He sank into one of the student desks, his head in his hands. Outside the window, he could hear the sounds of the fair continuing. Laughter and music and life going on. But for James, everything had stopped. His past had caught up with him and he had no idea how to face it. James sat in that empty classroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his wife asking where he was. The face painting was done, she wrote. Their daughter wanted to show him. He stared at the message but couldn't make his fingers work to type a response. How was he supposed to go back to them and pretend everything was normal? How was he supposed to look at his wife and daughter and act like his entire world hadn't just exploded? But he had to. So he stood up on shaking legs and walked back out into the bright sunshine and the cheerful chaos of the fair. He found his wife and daughter near the parking lot. His little girl had a butterfly painted on her cheek and was eating cotton candy. There you are. His wife looked relieved. I was starting to worry. Did you sign us up for the volunteer program? What? Oh no. No, they didn't need any more volunteers right now. The lie came easily, too easily. He'd been lying by omission for 20 years. What was one more? Daddy, look at my butterfly. Isn't it pretty? He forced a smile. It's beautiful, Princess. Just like you, the drive home was torture. His wife talked about the fair, about the school's impressive facilities, about how their daughter would thrive there. James made appropriate noises and nodded at the right times, but his mind was miles away, or rather 16 years away. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to his wife, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the scene in the classroom over and over. The look on that boy's face, Daniel. His son had a name, and it was Daniel. He thought about getting up, going to his study, maybe having a drink to calm his nerves. But he was afraid that if he moved, if he broke the stillness of the night, everything would become too real. His wife stirred beside him. You're thinking too loud, she murmured sleepily. What's wrong? Nothing. Just work stuff. She rolled over and put her hand on his chest. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Could he? Could he really tell her that he had a 16-year-old son he'd never mentioned? That he'd abandoned a pregnant woman 20 years ago? That the man she'd married, the man she thought she knew, was built on a foundation of cowardice and lies? I know, he whispered. Go back to sleep. But neither of them slept much that night. The next morning, James went through the motions of his usual routine. Shower, suit, coffee, kiss his daughter goodbye, promise his wife he'd be home for dinner. Normal. Everything had to look normal. But at his office, he couldn't focus. He stared at his computer screen without seeing it. His assistant brought him files to sign, and he couldn't remember what any of them were for. By lunchtime, he'd made 3 mistakes that could have cost the company thousands if anyone had noticed. He needed to talk to someone. He needed advice, but who? His business partners? His friends? They all knew him as the success story, the self-made millionaire. None of them knew about the parts of his past he'd carefully edited out. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? It's me. Her voice. The woman from the fair. Don't hang up, please. James's heart started racing. How did you get this number? Does it matter? Look, we need to talk, properly. Not yelling in a classroom with our son falling apart. Our son. The words hit him hard. How is he? There was a long pause. He's confused, angry. He barely slept last night. He has questions I can't answer. What kind of questions? Why you left. Whether you ever thought about him. If you have other kids, her voice caught on that last one. He saw your daughter at the fair. He knows you built a whole other family. James closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't help Daniel, but maybe answers will. Can you meet me? Tomorrow after he's at school. There's a coffee shop on Maple Street near the park. Do you remember it? He did remember. They used to go there when they were dating, back when the world was simpler and he was just a kid with big dreams and no idea how badly he'd screw everything up. I'll be there. What time? 10 o'clock. And James? Come alone. This conversation is going to be hard enough without an audience. She hung up before he could respond. James spent the rest of the day in a fog. That night at dinner, his daughter talked about wanting a puppy. His wife talked about renovating the guest bathroom. James pushed food around his plate and tried to look engaged. Daddy, you're not listening. His daughter pouted. Sorry, Princess. I'm listening now. You want a puppy? She's been talking about puppies for 10 minutes, his wife said with a gentle smile. Are you feeling okay? You've been distracted since the fair. There it was. His opening. He could tell her everything right now. Get it out in the open before it festered any longer. But he looked at his daughter's innocent face, at his wife's concerned expression, at this life they'd built together, and he couldn't do it. Not yet. Not until he understood what was going to happen next. Just some stressful deals at work, he said. Nothing to worry about, more lies. They were getting easier every time. The next morning, James told his wife he had an early meeting. Another lie. He drove to the coffee shop on Maple Street with his stomach in knots. It looked almost the same as it had 20 years ago. Same brick exterior, same little tables outside, same smell of coffee and baked goods. She was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept either. James sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around the warm cup she pushed toward him. "You remembered how I take my coffee," he said quietly. "Some things you don't forget." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Look, I didn't ask you here to reminisce. I need to know what you want from us and what I want." "Yes, what do you want? Do you want to be involved in Daniel's life? Do you want visitation rights, child support? Or are you just here to ease your guilty conscience before disappearing again?" James flinched. "That's not fair." "Not fair?" Her eyes flashed. "You abandoned us. You don't get to decide what's fair." "You're right. I'm sorry. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. There's no guidebook for this situation." She laughed bitterly. "You think I had a guidebook? You think I knew what to do when I was 23, pregnant and alone? I figured it out because I had to. Because I had a child depending on me. Tell me about him." James leaned forward. "Please, tell me about Daniel." Her expression softened slightly. "Why? So you can feel better about missing his entire life?" "No, because he's my son and I want to know who he is." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "He's kind. That's the first thing you should know. He volunteers at the school, helps elderly neighbors with their groceries, always stands up for kids who get bullied. He got that from somewhere, and it sure wasn't from you." The barb hurt, but James let it land. "He deserved it. He plays basketball. He's not amazing, but he loves it. He practices in the driveway every night, sometimes until it's too dark to see. He wants to be a doctor someday. A pediatrician, specifically. He loves kids," she smiled despite herself. "He's smart, too. Straight A's. Not because I push him, but because he genuinely loves learning." James felt tears burning in his eyes. "He sounds wonderful. He is wonderful. And I raised him to be that way, alone while you were busy building your empire. How did you do it? How did you manage?" She shrugged. "What choice did I have? I finished my nursing degree online while pregnant, worked night shifts after he was born so I could be with him during the day. My mother helped when she could before she passed. We lived in a tiny apartment for years, sometimes barely making rent. But we made it work. I should have been there. Yes, you should have. But you weren't, so we learned to live without you." She paused. "And honestly, we were okay. We are okay. Daniel has a good life. He's happy. Or at least he was until 2 days ago when his entire world got turned upside down." James winced. "What did you tell him? After the fair?" "The truth. What else could I tell him? He already figured out most of it anyway. He's 16, not stupid." She took a sip of her coffee. "I told him you were young and scared when I got pregnant. That you made a terrible choice, but that it wasn't his fault. That you leaving had nothing to do with him and everything to do with your own fear." "Did he believe you?" "I don't know. He's been quiet, withdrawn. He keeps asking questions I can't answer. Like whether you ever thought about him. Whether you ever tried to find us. Whether you would have come back if you'd known how hard things were." James felt like he was drowning. "What do I say to those questions?" "The truth. That's all you owe him now." "The truth. The truth is ugly. The truth usually is." She looked at him directly. "Did you ever think about us?" "Every day." The words came out before he could stop them. "Not a day went by that I didn't think about you, about the baby. I convinced myself you'd moved on, gotten married to someone better, raised the child with a real father. I told myself that was better than showing up and disrupting your life. That's a convenient story. It's true. I know it sounds like an excuse, but it's true. I was a coward then, and I stayed a coward. I built this successful life and told myself I deserved it, that I'd earned it through hard work. But late at night I knew the truth. I knew I was running from the biggest responsibility I'd ever had. She was crying now, quietly. Do you know what the worst part is? I waited for you. For months after you left, I kept thinking you'd come back, that you'd show up and apologize and we'd figure it out together. I kept checking my phone, my email, even went to places I thought you might be. And you never came, and I'm sorry. The words felt hollow, useless. Stop saying you're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give Daniel back his childhood with a father. Sorry doesn't pay back all the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, James said firmly. This was all me. All my fault. You were brave and strong and you did everything right. You gave that boy a good life, a better life than I could have given him back then. Maybe. But he still deserved to know his father, and now he does, and it's breaking his heart because his father is a stranger who abandoned him. They sat in silence for a while. Around them, the coffee shop buzzed with normal life. People working on laptops, friends catching up, students studying. None of them knew that two people's entire histories were colliding at this corner table. Finally, James spoke. What do you want me to do? I'll do whatever you think is best for Daniel. She looked surprised. You're asking me? You're his mother. You've been making the right decisions for him for 16 years. I trust your judgment. She seemed to consider this. I think maybe if you're serious about this, you should talk to him. Properly. Answer his questions honestly. Let him decide if he wants you in his life. What if he doesn't? What if he hates me? Then you live with that. The same way I've lived with your abandonment for 20 years. James nodded slowly. It was fair. More than fair, but James, she continued, her voice serious, if you do this, if you talk to him and get his hopes up, you cannot disappear again. You cannot decide in 6 months that this is too hard or too complicated. Either you commit to being in his life, really in his life, or you walk away now and let him heal. I want to be in his life. I want to know my son. Then you need to tell your wife, your daughter, because this isn't something you can hide. Daniel has a right to know his sister. Your daughter has a right to know her brother. And your wife deserves to know the truth about who she married. The weight of what she was saying settled over James like a heavy blanket. She was right. Of course she was right. But telling his wife meant risking everything. His marriage, his family, the life he'd built. Then again, hadn't he already risked all of that by lying in the first place? Okay, he said quietly. I'll tell her tonight. Good, she stood up. I'll talk to Daniel. See if he's willing to meet with you. But James, don't break his heart again. Because if you do, I swear I'll make sure you regret it. She left. And James sat alone with cold coffee and the terrifying knowledge that his two worlds were about to collide. James sat in his car outside his own house for 20 minutes. The lights were on inside, warm and inviting. Through the window, he could see his wife moving around the kitchen, probably making dinner. Normal. Everything looked so normal. But in a few minutes, normal would be destroyed, and it was all his fault. He finally forced himself to get out of the car and walk to the door. His hand shook as he turned the key. Inside, he could smell something cooking. Pasta, maybe. His daughter's favorite. You're home early. His wife called from the kitchen. Good timing. Dinner's almost ready. James walked into the kitchen. His daughter was sitting at the counter, coloring. She looked up and smiled at him. A big gap-toothed grin that made his heart ache. Daddy, look what I drew. It's our family. She held up the picture. 4 stick figures, all holding hands. Mom, Dad, her, and a puppy she was still campaigning for. A perfect little family. It's beautiful, sweetheart. His voice cracked slightly. His wife looked at him more carefully. James, what's wrong? You look terrible. I need to talk to you. It's important. Something in his tone made her stop stirring the pot. Okay, let me just get this situated. She turned down the stove and wiped her hands on a towel. Sweetie, she said to their daughter, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Daddy and I need to have a grown-up conversation. But dinner? We'll call you when it's ready. Go on. Their daughter pouted but slid off the stool and headed upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house. As soon as her bedroom door closed, his wife turned to him with worry in her eyes. You're scaring me. What's going on? Is it your health? The business? No, nothing like that. It's God, I don't even know how to say this. James ran his hands through his hair. Maybe we should sit down. They moved to the living room. His wife sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. James remained standing, pacing, trying to find the words that would destroy everything. At the school fair, he started. Something happened. Something I should have told you about years ago. Okay, she said slowly. Go on. You remember when our daughter ran up to that teenage boy? The volunteer. The one she said looked like you. Yes, I remember. He did look like me, because he is like me. He's my son. The silence that followed was deafening. His wife just stared at him, her face blank with shock. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. I have a son. He's 16 years old. His name is Daniel, and I've never met him before that day because I didn't know he existed. Or rather, I knew his mother was pregnant when I left her, but I never checked to see if she'd actually had the baby, if they needed help, if they were okay. I just disappeared and built a new life and pretended my past didn't exist. His wife stood up slowly, backing away from him. You're telling me you have a 16-year-old son you never mentioned? Yes. And you knew his mother was pregnant when you left her? Yes. So you abandoned a pregnant woman. Her voice was rising now. You abandoned your own child, and you never once thought to mention this to me? In 15 years of marriage? I'm so sorry. Sorry? She laughed, but it was a horrible sound. You're sorry? James, this isn't something you forgot to mention like an old girlfriend or a bad grade in college. This is a human being. A child, your child. I know. I know how bad this is, do you? Do you really? She was crying now, angry tears streaming down her face. Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand that you've been lying to me for our entire relationship. Every time I asked about your past, every time we talked about family, you lied. I never outright lied. Lies of omission are still lies. She shouted. Who are you? I thought I knew you. I thought I married a good man, an honest man. But you're not, are you? You're someone who can abandon his own child and then just move on like nothing happened. James felt tears running down his own face now. You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm not who you thought I was. I'm someone who made a terrible mistake 20 years ago and then spent 2 decades running from it. And that teenage boy, he knows now that you're his father? Yes, his mother told him. After the fair, his mother. His wife laughed bitterly again. The woman you left pregnant, what's her name? Do I get to know that at least? James told her the name. His wife sank back down onto the couch, her head in her hands. I feel like I don't know you at all, she said quietly. 15 years. We've been married for 15 years. We have a daughter together. And you never once thought to tell me about this. I thought about it every day. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it was in the past, that telling you would only hurt you for no reason. For no reason. She looked up at him with devastated eyes. Your son exists. He's real. He's been alive this whole time. That's not no reason. I know. You're right. I should have told you. I should have told you before we got married, before we had our daughter, before any of this. I should have been honest from the start. Yes, you should have. She wiped her eyes roughly. What happens now? Are you planning to have a relationship with him? His mother thinks I should. She thinks he deserves to know me, and that I need to either commit to being in his life or walk away permanently. And what do you want? James sat down, but not next to her. On the other chair across from her, like they were strangers. I want to know him. I want to try to make up for the years I missed. But I don't want to lose you and our daughter in the process. You should have thought about that before you lied to me for 15 years. Her voice was cold now. Did you think about how this would affect us? How it would affect our daughter to suddenly have a brother she never knew about? Our daughter already knows, in a way. She's the one who recognized him at the fair. She said he looked like her brother. His wife's eyes widened. Oh God, she knew before I did. Our 8-year-old daughter figured it out before her own mother. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, James? Explain it to me. Make me understand how any of this is okay. It's not okay. James stood up, his own frustration and guilt boiling over. Nothing about this is okay. I screwed up. I screwed up 20 years ago, and I've been screwing up ever since by not telling you. I know that. I know I'm a coward and a liar, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But that boy, Daniel, he doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. He deserves to know his father, even if his father is a complete disappointment. His wife was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, but no less hurt. I need time. I need to think about this, about what it means for us, for our family. I understand. No, I don't think you do. She stood up and faced him. I need to figure out if I can stay married to someone who could keep a secret like this. Who could lie to me by omission or otherwise for our entire relationship? I need to figure out if I can trust you again or if that trust is just broken forever. Please don't say that. James reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't touch me. Not right now. I can't. I just can't. She walked toward the stairs. I'm going to call my sister. I think our daughter and I are going to stay with her for a few days. You're leaving? I'm taking space. There's a difference, maybe. She paused on the stairs. You need to figure out what kind of man you want to be, James. The kind who runs away from hard things or the kind who faces them. And you need to do that before you involve our daughter in this mess. She went upstairs. James could hear her moving around, probably packing bags. He stood in the living room, surrounded by family photos and comfortable furniture and the life he'd built that was now crumbling around him. His daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, her favorite stuffed animal in her arms. Daddy, why is Mommy crying? Why are we going to Aunt Rachel's house? James climbed the stairs and knelt down in front of her. Mommy and Daddy need to work through some grown-up stuff, but we both love you very much, okay? Nothing about that will ever change. Is it because of my brother? She asked innocently. The boy from the fair? James felt like he'd been punched. What makes you say that? I heard you and Mommy talking. You were loud. She looked at him with those trusting eyes. Is he really my brother? Can I meet him? Maybe someday, Princess. But right now things are complicated. Grown-ups always say things are complicated when they mean things are bad, she said wisely. Then she hugged him tight. I love you, Daddy, even when things are complicated. James held his daughter and cried into her hair. She was so innocent, so trusting, and he'd brought this chaos into her life, into all of their lives. His wife came downstairs with 2 bags. She'd been crying too, her eyes red and puffy. Come on, sweetheart, she said to their daughter. Let's go. Can I say goodbye to Daddy? You just did, baby. Come on. James watched them leave. The door closed behind them and the house fell silent. He stood there in the entryway, alone in the home that suddenly felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It took him a moment to realize it must be Daniel's mother. Daniel wants to meet you. Tomorrow, 4 p.m., at the basketball courts in Central Park. He'll be practicing. You can talk after. Don't be late. And James? Don't make me regret this. James stared at the message. In less than 24 hours, he'd told his wife the truth and she'd left. And now he was going to meet his son. Really meet him. Not just see him across a crowded fair. He walked to his study and poured himself a drink. Then another. He looked around at his awards and diplomas on the walls. Evidence of success. Evidence that he'd made something of himself. But what did any of it mean if he'd built it all on a foundation of cowardice? He thought about not showing up tomorrow. About letting Daniel down again. Just like he'd let him down for 16 years. It would be easier. He could tell his wife he'd tried, but it didn't work out. They could go back to their life, just the 3 of them. But he couldn't do that. Not again. He'd run away once before and it had poisoned his entire life. If he ran now, he'd never forgive himself. His daughter would grow up knowing her father was a coward. His wife would never be able to trust him again, and Daniel, his son, would learn that his father had the chance to step up and chose not to. No, he had to go. He had to face this, no matter how hard it was, no matter what it cost him. James set down his glass and went to bed, though he knew he wouldn't sleep. Tomorrow he would meet his son. And somehow, some way, he would try to become the father he should have been all along, even if it was 16 years too late. The next afternoon, James drove to Central Park with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He found the basketball courts easily. They were in a public area, busy with people playing and watching. Safe, neutral territory. He saw Daniel before the boy saw him. The teenager was alone on one of the courts practicing free throws. He was tall for his age, lean and athletic, moving with the easy grace of youth. Every time he sank a basket, James felt a strange swell of pride, even though he had no right to it. James got out of his car and walked slowly toward the court. Daniel saw him coming and stopped dribbling. The ball rolled away, forgotten. They stood there, father and son, separated by years and pain and bad choices. Hi, James said lamely. Daniel just looked at him. Those green eyes, so much like his own, were guarded and hurt. Mom said you wanted to talk. I do. If you're willing to listen, the boy shrugged. I'm here, aren't I? They sat on a bench at the edge of the court. The silence between them was heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, James took a breath and started talking. I'm going to tell you the truth, all of it. Not the sanitized version, not excuses, just the truth. And then you can decide if you ever want to see me again. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, and so James told him about being young and terrified, about running away, about building a new life, about thinking of him every single day but being too much of a coward to come back, about the lies and the guilt and the regret. He told him everything. And with each word he felt the weight of 20 years starting to lift, even as he saw the pain in his son's eyes. When he finished, Daniel was crying silently. Why, he asked, his voice breaking. Why weren't we enough? Why wasn't I enough? And James, looking at his son's devastated face, finally understood the full weight of what he'd done. He'd made a child feel unwanted, unloved, not enough. You were always enough, James said, his own voice thick with tears. You were always more than enough. I was the one who wasn't enough. I wasn't man enough to face my responsibilities. I wasn't brave enough to be your father. And I'm so sorry. Daniel looked at him. What happens now? That's up to you. I want to be in your life if you'll let me. I want to try to be the father I should have been, but I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you never want to see me again. The boy was quiet for a long time. Then he said something James wasn't expecting. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I think maybe I want to try to know you, because you're my dad, and I've spent my whole life wondering about you. And now you're here and you're real and you're a mess, but you're mine. Does that make sense? James nodded, unable to speak. But if you leave again, Daniel continued, his voice stronger now, if you give up on me again, I'm done. Forever. You get one more chance. That's it, I won't leave, James promised. I swear to you I won't leave again. They sat there on that bench as the sun began to set, two strangers bound by blood, trying to figure out how to become father and son. 3 months passed. 3 months that felt like 3 years. 3 months of the hardest work James had ever done in his life. It started small. Coffee once a week with Daniel and his mother. Awkward conversations where James learned about his son's life in careful, measured doses. Daniel talked about school, about basketball, about his friends, normal teenage stuff. But underneath every conversation was the weight of 16 years of absence. James showed up to every single meeting, even when work was crazy, even when he was exhausted, even when the silence between them felt too heavy to bear. He showed up, his wife hadn't come back home. She and their daughter were still staying with her sister. They'd had several long, painful conversations about the future, about trust, about honesty, about whether their marriage could survive this. I don't know if I can get past this, she'd told him during one particularly hard conversation. Every time I look at you, I remember that you kept this massive secret from me, that you abandoned a child. What kind of man does that? A scared, stupid kid who grew into a scared, stupid adult, James had answered. But I'm trying to be better. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to do better now. She'd softened slightly at that. I can see you're trying. I can see you showing up for him. And that counts for something. But James, trust isn't rebuilt overnight, I know. I'll wait as long as it takes. The hardest part was explaining everything to his daughter. At 8 years old, she couldn't fully understand the complexity of adult mistakes and consequences. But she understood she had a brother, and in her simple, beautiful way, she was excited about it. When can I meet him? She asked every time James picked her up for their scheduled visits. I want to show him my room and my toys and my butterfly drawing. Soon, princess. We have to take things slow. But Daniel's mother was warming to the idea. After one of their coffee meetings, she'd pulled James aside. He talks about you, she said quietly. At home, he's still angry, still hurt, but he's curious. He wants to understand you. That's progress. What do I do with that? James asked helplessly. How do I help him understand something I barely understand myself? You keep showing up. You keep being honest.